So to get started, we are going to have our project in Cinema 4D open, and it's just a blank project for now. The first thing we are going to make is a floor. That's where the text is going to be coming out of, so it's basically going to jump out from under this floor here. Let's set up our camera, just so we don't have to move it ever again. So we'll make a new camera. Click this option over here so you can see from the camera's perspective. And if you look down in the position, size, and rotation, you can see that the numbers aren't exactly perfect. So I'm going to change the rotation to be 0 and then -90. That way we're looking perfectly perpendicular to the ground. And for X, I'm going to make it 0. And that should be pretty good for now. Once we place the text, we'll be able to frame it a little bit better. Another thing I'm going to do is change the render settings. The output size is the most important thing. I'm just going to make it 1920 by 1080, just so once again we can kind of get a reference of how it's going to look in our frame. Let's add some text in here, so I'm just going to go to Mode Graph, Mode Text. And it's going to be crooked for now, but let's just type in some text in. Here I'll type in Studio X. And I'm going to align this to the middle. So let's rotate this text by getting the rotate tool and pressing and holding shift, and you can choose 90 degrees. So that's what we want. I guess for some reason the X letter is slightly higher than it needs to be, but that doesn't matter for now. So I'm going to uncheck the camera view. Oh, I guess it was just the perspective. I guess they're all just super flat against the floor. But the thing that I want to do now is extrude the text. So I'm going to raise it up to the height where I think it will be, where it is going to be at its highest height, which I think at 45 looks pretty good. So I'm going to change the depth of the text to make it go into the ground slightly. So as you can tell, it's in the ground. And I'm also going to change the font. So I downloaded a font called Go Bold. It looks pretty good, but I think I'm going to go with something like basic title font. As you can see, it's super clean, looks super nice, and that's what I'm going to stick with. The only thing that I see an issue with is if you look at it, it has really, really sharp edges. So even in real life, if you have like a metal sharp edge, it's actually slightly beveled. You just can't notice it. It's a super micro bevel. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to caps, and I'm going to choose fillet cap for both, but I'm just going to change the radius to be 1 and 1. Actually, I will actually make it even smaller, so I think I might go with something like 0.2 for both of them. And I'm going to make it 3 steps. Let's go with 5 steps. So you can see now it has a slight little bevel on the text, and that's actually going to give us some nice little reflection on the corners, you know, a little highlight, because when you have a 90-degree angle, it can't catch any of those highlights. So that looks pretty good for now. Let's go back to our camera view, see how it's framed. So it's framed slightly high, so I'm just going to bring the text down to the center to align it nice with the center of the frame. This looks pretty good. And let's save this project. I'm going to just save it in the documents and call it Clean Shadow Title, because that is the biggest key for this title, is that we're going to be playing with the shadows on this text. Let's create some basic materials for now. If you double click in the material tab, you'll make a new material. I'm going to go into the white color, and right now it's at 80% white. I'm going to go to 95, not exactly 100% white. So let's take those, throw it on the ground, and throw it on the text. So if you hit render, you can see that it's going to look really boring and lame. It's actually going to look pretty bad. So now this is the goal. We need to make this look cool. So let's uncheck our camera here, and actually let's right click on it, go to Cinema 4D tags, and choose protection. That way, if you do end up being in the camera and you're trying to move it, it just won't move. So you're not, ruining your scene. So now what we need to do is create a light that is going to cast the shadow down onto the floor. So go to light and choose area light. And I'm just going to raise it up and bring it back out here. And you can see you can actually change the properties like the length and the width of it. And if you click on the light, you can do it inside of the details tab. You can see the size X and size Y. So for now, let's go into general and choose shadow area. That's going to give us a really harsh shadow, which is going to be fine for now. We're going to see how it's going to look on the render, and then if you need to make it softer, you could always do that. So I'm going to bring it down slightly, and I'm also going to angle it to kind of point kind of towards the text. So let's hit render and see how that looks. So you can see we are actually starting to get somewhere with the hard shadows, but the issue that we're running into now is that everything is getting really, really dark. So we're getting this extreme contrast, which could look nice, but I think it's kind of throwing off the dynamic of this scene. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to make another area light, bring it up, rotate it 90 degrees. I'm going to make it slightly bigger, just kind of eyeballing it here, just so it's kind of the size of the text. And I'm going to go into details. For fall off, I'll select linear, and I'm just going to increase the sphere until it's kind of, just illuminating the front part of the text. So let's go back to our camera, hit render, and see if it's looking any better. So you can see it's starting to look slightly nicer, but we kind of lost that shadow that we had earlier, and that's because of the intensity of this second light that we put on top. Also, what I've noticed is when we rendered it with this shadow, it's kind of going out, and we want really, really straight lines. And as an example, the sun is a parallel light, so no matter what you have, it's gonna make a really, really harsh shadow that's just pointing straight, and it doesn't get really diffused like that unless you have like clouds in a way or something similar. So what you're going to need to do is create a parallel light to mimic the shadow of each individual letter. So in order to create a parallel light, we're going to choose the light that we had earlier, and we're going to go into type and choose parallel. And we are going to rotate this light 180 degrees. That way it's pointing towards our text. And we might drop it down a little bit lower and bring it back. And for shadow area should be fine. Let's take a look at how that looks. So once again, our second light is really intense, so I'm just going to turn that off just so I can see how the shadows are looking. So this is what it looks like with both lights on. Let's go change the render settings and then maybe tweak the lighting slightly. So we're going to go with physical render, and we're going to turn on ambient occlusion, and let's render this and take a look at how it's looking. So now we're getting way cleaner edges, and overall the picture is starting to actually be pieced together. Let's change a couple more settings and see what we could do. Let's add global illumination, and we're going to choose QMC for both, and let's go with low samples just so we can kind of see the result. So So if you're starting to get somewhere with the look that you're aiming for, the only issue is the render time. As you can see, it took us 11 minutes just to render this frame, and this isn't even in 1080p. So we need to tweak some settings, but before we will do that, let's get our animation done, so that the only things that we need to do is just tweak some render settings and maybe some material settings. So in order to get the animation looking nice, we are going to click on our Mo text, go into MoGraph, Effector, and let's go with plane. And instead of the Y coordinates, we are going to choose the Z coordinates until the letters are underground. You'll try to bring them pretty close. So let's go with 60. Yeah, 60 looks pretty good. But now we also need to affect only some of the letters and not all of them. So just go into the fall off and choose box. So I will scale the box to fit all of the text. That looks pretty good. And let me change the length of this to be 300. That way we have a 10-second project. So on frame 20, I will click the plane, I will hit this keyframe, and I will go to maybe frame 220, and you can just push this all the way back until all of the letters are fully revealed. So let's go into our camera and take a look at what it looks like. So you can see the letters slowly come out. I'm thinking maybe I wanted to be a little bit faster, so I'm going to take the keyframe and drag it to 160. That looks pretty good. So let's add another material. Let's actually copy and paste this material by hitting Command C, Command V on a Mac. And I'm going to call this with reflection. And I'm going to paste this instead of the existing material on the Mo text. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go into the reflectance and add GGX. And for global reflection brightness, I'll put it to 10. And for roughness, I'll just do also 10%, just so it's a little bit rough. So yeah, that looks pretty good. I'm going to close it off. And let's play with some more render settings. And don't forget to save your project. So for render settings, we need to cut down on some render time. And because we have global illumination and ambient occlusion, we can actually go back to standard render. And let's see if it looks any different without ambient occlusion, which usually affects the shadows. And before we do that, we are also going to go into our infinite light here. And we can drop down the accuracy to 50%, density to 180, and let's bring up a minimum samples to be 24, just so we can get rid of some of that noise in the shadows that we get. And I'm actually going to go to a slightly different frame just so we can kind of see of how the different height affects the shadow. And let's hit render and take a look at how long this might take. So it's still taking quite some time, but we are getting slightly less noise in the shadows. So let's tweak some more settings and see where we can get to. So let's change intensities to 40 and 40. Sample count to 6. And let's go into our shadow here. maximum samples. Let's turn those up to 36. And let's take a look. So you can see quite a fast result. Let's do interactive render region. I'm just gonna choose this section over here so you can kind of get a feel for what it is. And let's start turning up some samples. Let's do 12. So it's getting smoother. Let's do 24. Even smoother. Let's try turning down the intensity less. So that didn't make much difference, but it rendered faster, and let's change the intensity even less here. Okay, let's change the sample count to 36. Looking pretty good. And let's change maximum samples in our shadows, something like 64. And let's make accuracy 100 and see how fast it's going to be. So let's bring up samples to maybe 120, see if you can get any better result. So it seems like past 36, it's not making any bigger improvements. I'm going to turn off interactive render region and just render this piece and see how it looks. So yeah, after 50 samples on here, you're not getting much better results. So let's go ahead and change this back to, let's go with 40. You can see that works out pretty fast. Now let's change our diffuse depth to be 4. Let's change the intensity to 50. And let's change our main intensity to 50 as well. So yeah, I don't see much better changes after 36 samples. So let's just take a look. So I'm gonna render this frame, see how fast it's gonna be. And hopefully that is gonna be our final output. This is a much better render time than what we had before. As you can see, we cut it down by about 10 times. So before it took about 11 minutes, and now it's only taking 1 minute and 24 seconds. So now the final thing that I would want to do is actually animate the camera. So I'm going to get rid of that protection tag. And when all of the text appears at 180, I will keyframe the camera. And I will actually exit the camera so I can see what I will be doing to it. And on frame 0, I will bring the camera down a good amount, and then I'm going to rotate it. I think around 21 degrees seems pretty good. So now if you take a look at it, it's slowly zooming out until it comes to the end. The problem here is that it starts slow, picks up speed, and then it ends slow, which wouldn't really look good if you're fading from black, because you can kind of see how it's picking up speed. So what I will do is I will go to timeline, I will choose the camera, and I will hit this little F curve mode. And for position and for rotation, you can see there's a curve here. So what I will do is I will choose this curve, and let's zoom in to really see the curve. It's hard to see because it's blue, but what you're going to do is you're going to change the curve to go straight up, and extend this slightly out, so at the end, when it's coming to an end, it does it at a slower rate. So if you start playing it now, you can see that it starts curving, and we need to do the same thing for position. So it should be the Y position. Yes, so we're gonna do the same thing where we're kind of curving it up, and this we want to make it slow down closer to the end. So if you start playing it, it's zooming out, and the text appears on the screen. Perfect. And I would actually want to make it 240 frames now, because there's way too much. It's going for way too long. I think this is looking pretty good. Let's go ahead and set it to render. So under output, I will choose all the frames. I want it to be at 24 frames a second, and I will choose a location where I want to save it. And normally I save it as EXRs, but I think there's not much things I will be changing to this in post, so I will set PNG. I don't need an alpha channel. This should be good. And then choose a location. I will just call this clean title. Call this clean. So perfect. I'm gonna set this to render, and I will catch you guys in After Effects. So now that we're inside of After Effects, we are going to import our image sequence that we exported from Cinema 4D. You can do that by double-clicking in the project window, going into the folder where your files were saved. I'm going to sort it by name so I can choose the first one. And you have to make sure that PNG sequence is selected over here. And then you can hit OK. I'm going to right-click and choose Interpret Footage, Main. Because the frame rate, it assumed that it's at 30 frames a second, but we exported it at 24. So I will hit 24 frames, hit OK. And now I will throw it into a new composition. Let's fit it to comp and check it out. That looks pretty good. I like the way that it's styled, and as you can see, just like I've mentioned before, you can get these nice highlights on the corners because the edges are beveled. So that looks pretty good. I wouldn't be doing too many changes to this. There's only a couple of things. First one is I'm just going to throw a anamorphic crop on this. I always say this is not the right way to do it. So this isn't always the right way to do it, but it's fine for this video. So I'm just gonna take it, drag it in here. Basically, it's just a downloaded image of a crop. And I'm gonna go to transform, fit to comp, and there you go, you've got a little crop. It cropped our video. Next thing I want to do is add some grain to it to just kind of mix with the grain that we have already from the shadows. So we'll go to Effects and Presets, add grain, and I'm just going to throw it onto our composition here. So I'm going to take my preview region and put it over here where we can see some white. That should be pretty good. That should be fine. Maybe I'm going to bring down the intensity. Bring down the intensity to 0.8. Maybe 0.6. Yeah, that should be fine. But you can see, hopefully, YouTube compression doesn't ruin it, but you can see it kind of softens some of the black dots that you're getting on the image. As you can see, it also helps soften around the black area here. So that should be good. I'm going to set it to final output. And now I've got some green on your video. Next thing I'm going to do is some slight color correction. I'm just going to choose curves. But first I need to make an adjustment layer. So I'm going to go to layer, new, adjustment layer. I'm going to hit enter to rename it. And I'm just going to rename it color. I will take curves, throw it in the color, and I'm just going to, the thing I want to do is I just want to make the shadows a little bit more blue. So I will go to blue, and I will start pulling up the shadows, and I'm going to try to straighten it back out. So there you go, you can see the difference that we made here. Maybe I need to make it slightly more intense. And then maybe I will go into the red and try to get some of the midtones and highlights a little bit warmer. There we go, that's looking pretty good. So you can see the difference that we made. So this should be a pretty good balance of warm to blue. That's looking pretty good. And then one last thing I'm going to do is add a little vignette. I can do that by making a solid the same size as the comp, making it fully black, going into an ellipse and just double clicking, going into the mask, choosing subtract, feathering it a lot, bringing it under the anamorphic, and we need to do that for the color as well. We're going to need to bring the anamorphic all the way to the top so we're not accidentally manipulating the color of the black bars. And then the vignette is way too harsh in my opinion, so I will just make it like 30%. So that looks pretty good. So you can see the difference between the original and the starting. It just looks a little more interesting, and the grain helps out. So this is basically it for this video. Hopefully you learned something new. And comment down below other videos that you would like me to cover. If there's any specific things you would want me to make a tutorial about. If you're not subscribed to this channel, be sure to subscribe. I will be posting new videos all of the time, so don't miss out and subscribe to my channel. I will see you guys in the next one.